Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a MuDu Doublematic on the channel. I got this watch off of eBay, a pretty good deal. So this watch was made in the probably mid-1950s, I believe. It has a date, and it is an automatic, so it's self-winding. It does not have a quick set date, so you do have to set the time and fast forward the time for 24 hours if you want to change that date one day ahead. This watch company is pretty interesting. It was founded in Geneva, Switzerland in 1957. The name likely combines the names of Adolf Müller and Kurt Dubach, so MuDu. In the 1950s, these watches were basically bootleg imported into Great Britain. There was a big sold under the counter in local pubs. And then in, I think, 1961, I read there was a huge raid, customs raid in the UK, and they seized a huge stash of these MuDu watches. So these are kind of bootleg, gangster, under the table, sold in pubs watches in the 50s. So let's get the case back open here with our very high-tech case back opening tool, the rubber ball. Just gives you a little grip to get these case backs open. Let's see what we're working with here. Get it the rest of the way open. So this watch has a FELSA 4002 movement. It is an automatic movement, which means that rotor there that you see in the middle spins as your hand moves around, and you go about your day. It winds the watch. So theoretically, if you're wearing this watch, you shouldn't have to wind it yourself. You can still manually wind it with the crown. So we have the crown taken out there. So let's get this movement spacer ring. So this metal ring sits between the movement and the case, so the movement doesn't jangle around too much. And it's a really nice looking dial, nice cream colored dial, kind of gold hands with a nice patina on them. I'm not sure what type of loom this is, so there's the movement ring. Let's get that crown out of the way. So here I am removing the hands with these polished metal hand removal tools. So those hands will come right off. You kind of want to line them up so they're easier to remove. So we have them lined up here. And there they are. So we will put those away in this little box that I have, a spare box, just to keep these hands safe. Don't want to get them bent or stepped on or squished or anything. Hands are delicate little things. We don't want to have to do any hand restoration work. All right, so we'll loosen that setting lever again so we can remove the crown. I did have to put the crown back in to move the hands in order to get them in a good removal position. I think I'm having a little bit of a hard time with I need to sharpen my screwdriver here. Those setting lever screws are very small. And now here we are loosening the dial feet screws. So these screws are small, very, very tiny screws on the sides of the dial that friction hold the dial onto the movement. There are little metal feet on the back of these brass dials. So we have that off, and then it just comes right off. And we'll also put this dial away in a safe place. I have this dial case, kind of a little springy piece of plastic. So the dial just sits there, and then the top of the case has a little plastic, almost pinion type thing that keeps the dial from rolling around. All right, let's remove this winding rotor. There's a small little clip that clips this winding rotor in place. It's a little different from other movements that have a big winding rotor screw. So I've undone the clip, and then that winding rotor should just come right off. There we go. We'll remove the minute wheel. And next we'll remove the cannon pinion with our Presto tool. You can also use that to remove hands, but I mostly use that to remove the cannon pinion, which is friction fit. Yeah, it's a little easier in the movement holder here. So now this date ring, I'm kind of checking it out. I've never worked on one of these movements before, but there are a few little plates that kind of hold this date ring into place. So we'll start by removing this first small plate that kind of sits over the setting lever spring and the keyless works. And these plates have these tiny screws. I mean, these screws are the smallest in the movement. Oh, and there goes one. But luckily that didn't fly too far. Hold on to that. Might have a little bit of magnetism on my tweezers, or they're just sticky from something else. All right, and then we'll attack the next tiny little plate that secures this day, or I guess date disc. So this FELSA 4002 movement is part of a family of FELSA movements. FELSA is a movement manufacturer. Back in the day, a lot of watch companies didn't actually make their own movements. They hired out, I guess, and they bought movements from movement manufacturers, to a certain spec that would fit in their cases, certain features. They bought these by the thousands, tens of thousands. Maybe did a little modification at their own factory, and then put them inside of their cases with their dials. There goes our date disc, or date ring. Next, we're going to remove the motion works. So all of these small gears are what helps us set the time. That's what moves the hands, basically. On the side of the movement, there are quite a few small springs. So that was a date corrector spring, which we'll see when we get the movement back together later, helps progress that day or date wheel, date ring forward. And now I'm holding another spring down here with my little plastic stick, because these springs are so small and so lightweight, so thin, that if they go flying across the room, they'll stick to anything. They'll stick in a plant, they'll stick inside the carpet, they'll stick to your clothes, and they're very difficult to find, so you really don't want to lose these springs. All right, and next we remove the setting lever spring, which has a nice sized screw. It's a setting lever spring, and that also kind of acts as a plate that sits over the rest of the keyless works, the yoke spring. So here is the yoke, and underneath that yoke is the yoke spring, and we just need to make sure that that doesn't fly away as we lift the yoke. I do believe I already pulled out the yoke spring. So that was actually the date corrector washer, I guess we'll call it that. Have a better view of that on the reassembly of the watch later in the video. Stick around for that. That was our setting lever. And that was our clutch. And then our clutch wheel also comes out. So this large screw is the date corrector wheel. So as the power moves through those gears, they're kind of ratioed up and down, and this wheel actually turns around once every 24 hours. And it will flip the date ring around as we approach midnight. Okay, that does it for the dial side of the watch. Now we're getting into the watchmaker side. The first thing we're going to do is remove these bridges. So this watch has, actually let's remove the balance first. We removed this early in the process just to get out of the way. It's the most delicate part of the watch. It has a very, very, very fine spring called the hairspring that makes that wheel oscillate back and forth as you're seeing there. So we just need to find a pivot point so that we can get it out nice and easily. We don't really want to wrench it out of there. And now we're back to the bridges and the automatic winding works of the watch. This watch has a small, I guess it's not too small, it's a self-winding module that sits on top of the train wheel bridge, which is the piece of metal that goes over all of the wheels or gears that do all of the work, that transfer all of the power from the mainspring to the hands and to the balance wheel and pallet fork ultimately. So it's held, this self-winding module is a little sandwich of metal and more gears that's screwed on top of the bridge here. Again, this is the first time I've worked on one of these movements, so I hadn't actually seen this self-winding module yet. I didn't really look at any diagrams or parts catalogs to see what I was getting myself into. I kind of started to figure things out as things came apart, and then it made way more sense as I put it all back together. At the time, I don't think I actually realized that this was a module that was screwed onto the bridge. What's cool is you can remove this part and the watch still functions. You could put the watch back together without this installed. You could put the watch back together without that self-winding rotor. The watch would still run. It just wouldn't wind itself. It would basically, you've turned it back into a manual-only watch. So as you can see, the self-winding module is kind of a little sandwich of a bottom plate, all of the internal components of the self-winding module, and then a top plate that covers it all. So this is the top plate, actually, with some of the gears that stuck to it. I learned later that all of these gears can just be installed onto the bottom plate, and then the top plate can be reinstalled. So this is a small little spring that interacts with the two tiny wheels in this self-winding module. And that, I believe, is the smallest screw in the movement. Right, and this is the bottom of the self-winding module. It came apart in kind of a weird way. later in the video when we reinstall this, it makes way more sense. And it actually took me a little while to figure out where everything went, because it wasn't a great disassembly video to follow. So this is kind of a pivot that the bigger gear in the self-winding module fits onto in the center. And it fits on with these 3 tiny screws. Lots of tiny screws in this movement. I guess they're all tiny, but these are the tiniest. So small. Get those screws out of the way. This could probably go through the cleaning machine assembled. But I decided to take it apart anyway, just to get a more thorough cleaning. You can see there it has kind of a pivot there in the middle that the largest gear in the self-winding module fits over. And now I'll go ahead and remove the pallet fork bridge. So this also has a small little spot where you can fit your screwdriver and lever it out of the way. So this bridge holds the pallet fork down, and there's our pallet fork, which interacts with the balance wheel, and that's what kind of controls the speed or the rate at which the power is ultimately released from the mainspring of the watch. And now we'll get back to our mainspring barrel bridge, as well as the gear train bridge. Whoop! Luckily, I was able to find all of those screws. So let's see what we decide to remove first. Just to make sure I got all of the screws that are holding everything down. And that isn't the best way to remove a bridge. That's a good way to break some pivots, but it came off. Now this bridge actually has the crown wheel, this movement actually has the crown wheel attached to the underside of the gear train bridge. Typically this is installed kind of up next to the mainspring barrel. You'll see kind of a reverse threaded screw and a gear or a wheel, and then the mainspring barrel. Well, this crown wheel is actually integrated with the gear train. So we'll remove the wheels. Do a little bit of pre-inspection as we take them off, just to make sure all the pivots are intact. This is the center seconds pinion. The seconds hand actually attaches to that tiny little pinion. It goes all the way through the center of all the wheels. This is the escape wheel, which is what interacts with the pallet fork that we removed just a second ago. And it looks like I missed a screw on the... Oh, nope, sorry, this is the click screw. And there you can see the click, which is kind of what ratchets against the mainspring barrel, and it's what prevents the watch from unwinding, especially when you don't have a pallet fork installed. And then we'll also remove the click spring, which is what makes the click kind of ratchet back to its position. All right, this is the mainspring barrel bridge, which sits over the mainspring barrel. So this is an interesting mainspring barrel. The top and the bottom both have a set of teeth. It's kind of the combo mainspring barrel and ratchet wheel in one. And the ratchet wheel is would be the top part, and then the mainspring arbor is attached to that top lid. There's no detachable arbor. So this is a center wheel bridge, and that tiny little piece could have probably been left on, but we removed it anyway. It's just a cover that goes in the middle of the center wheel bridge. So we'll remove the two screws that hold that center wheel bridge down. And remove the center wheel bridge. Just like that. And with that removed, we can remove the center wheel, which is the last of the wheels that we have. And that is the complete teardown of this watch. So that nice dirty main plate probably hasn't been cleaned in 20 or 30 years, maybe longer. But we're going to put it through the watch cleaning machine, get all of these parts nice and cleaned. And we're going to reassemble this watch, oil it, and get it running again. So let's actually see what we're working with as far as the mainspring goes. Again, this is a ratchet wheel / mainspring barrel combo. So we can get that open and then try to, as gently as we can, get the mainspring out. We don't want that to go flying into our face or into our eyes. Be a little dangerous. Safety glasses is, okay. It's not quite a disaster. But this mainspring is, it looks original. This is a old school spiral type mainspring. Newer mainsprings are more of an S shape, and they're made of a bit stronger materials than they used to be made of when this type of mainspring was common. And I actually end up just buying a new mainspring for this watch. And again, so what we do here when we tear down a watch and put it back together is we put all of the parts of the watch into these baskets. So I have a little accelerated video here of this that's all the parts of the watch laid out on the mat there. And so we'll put all of the parts into these little divided baskets. These will get stacked on top of one another. And then it will get put in to the watch cleaning machine. I found this watch cleaning machine online. It's a guy in Germany that makes these by hand, actually. He 3D prints the baskets, puts wire mesh, super fine wire mesh. It does a pretty good job of holding those tiny screws without them falling through the super fine mesh. The smaller parts I actually do put in these smaller baskets. The mesh is just a little bit finer, and so I don't have to stress out about losing any of the smallest screws. So I just move some parts around and make space for these little baskets. Put a little musical chairs with the parts. There we go. And we stack the baskets, and then the stacked baskets go inside of a larger basket, which then gets attached to a motor. And this motor spins at different speeds, has a variable speed, and then it changes direction every few seconds. And then we'll move over to the cleaning solutions. The first cleaning solution It's by a company called Elma. It's a concentrated ammoniated cleaner that gets rid of all the old oils that were used, on the previous service of the watch, or who knows, this watch could have been never serviced, so oils from the factory, 70-year-old oils. So I usually go 20 minutes in each of these. The second solution is just distilled water. So we move it from the cleaning solution to a jar of distilled water after we kind of spin the solution out of the cleaning machine. So I have this measuring cup that I like to kind of move it into, and then I'll turn on the motor at a high speed, and we'll spin the solution out of the parts. And that solution will just get poured back into the jar that it came out of. Our next jar is, like I said, distilled water. So this just rinses the solution, the cleaning solution, off of the parts. And where I live here, the water is very, very hard, so we don't use any tap water for this. You don't want to leave any mineral residue on these parts. So distilled water it is. So that comes out of the distilled water. Same thing, all the water gets spun off, just so we're not diluting the final rinse, which is 99% isopropyl alcohol. So let's spin the distilled water out of the parts. And I usually do this for, 10, 15, maybe 20 seconds. It doesn't take long to get the water spun out of the parts. And our final rinse is 99% isopropyl alcohol. So this really displaces all of any remaining water on the parts. You don't want any water sitting on these parts after the cleaning process is finished, because that just ultimately leads to rust. And we don't want any parts rusting. So each one of these gets 20 minutes, and each one gets a spin dry treatment. Moving over to the microscope, just inspect all of the parts after they've been cleaned, just to make sure the teeth look good, the pivots look good. There's no huge strands of hair or old gunky oil or dirt on any. So you can see the pivots, those tiny little pivots there that stick into the jewel holes on the main plate and on the bridge that sits above these wheels. And this is the pallet fork. As you can see, this does not go through the watch cleaning machine, because that kind of amber colored stuff, that's shellac. It's a natural adhesive, and that would actually just be completely dissolved by these cleaning solutions and isopropyl alcohol. So that gets dunked in a special solution to get any oil off of those stones there, or any oil that may be on this part. We don't want to stick it in anything too harsh. And so here we do have a problem. So this is the train wheel bridge, and as you can see, this is one of the jewels, and it is shattered, cracked. So I am going to order, I don't have a jeweling tool, so I don't have a really ability to change this. So I'm going to order a new bridge, and we're just going to swap out the bridge, or, not necessarily new, but whatever I can find. All right, let's get this watch put back together. This is our new mainspring. Typically online you can find, you type in, you can do a search, a quick Google. It'll tell you what mainsprings work well in your watch. And you go online to your favorite parts supplier, put in those measurements, and order the mainspring you need. These mainsprings are pre-lubricated, so we don't have to put any oil on ourselves. I did learn the hard way that this mainspring is actually a left-handed mainspring as it goes into the barrel, so this is actually the second time I ended up putting a mainspring into this watch. So since this is an automatic watch, we are going to put some braking grease around the inside of that mainspring barrel wall. The reason we do this is because automatic watches, they're constantly being wound, and they get to a point to where the mainspring will actually start to kind of, when it gets to its most wound point, it will then continue to spin and rub along the inside of that mainspring barrel. So we put this, it's called braking grease, very thick grease along the inside of that barrel, so it doesn't create any metal shavings, and it just smoothly moves alongside the metal barrel. I did get a little bit on the base of the mainspring barrel, so we'll just take a little bit of this Rodico, this watchmaker's silly putty, just do a little cleanup there. And typically, is there still a little more? Yeah. All right, just make sure that's all out of there. Typically, these mainsprings, if it's right hand wound, which is the typical way a mainspring is wound, the colored side goes up toward you. But this does actually need to go in the barrel as a left hand mainspring. So color goes down. Again, this is the second time I'm doing this. I actually I installed the first mainspring, tried to wind it back in myself, and ended up breaking it with my mainspring winders. So I had to order a new one. So it goes. And see there, that's the left hand direction as it spirals out toward the left. And this is the integrated not click spring, but I guess ratchet wheel and arbor combo. And that will get just kind of friction fit back as the lid. And there is the mainspring reassembled. So we're going to start with the movement side, or some people call it the watchmaker side of the movement. The first thing we're going to do is get this balance back out of the main plate. I did forget to mention earlier, we do put the balance back into the main plate when we put it through the cleaning machine, because it's nice and protected in the main plate as it goes through the cleaning solutions. We don't really want that hairspring flying around in the cleaning solution, and the balance wheel actually sits in two pivots, one on the top of the balance cock, and then the other pivot goes into the main plate, so it holds that balance wheel in pretty securely. So we'll remove it during our reassembly so we don't do anything crazy with it. Just set it aside. All right, and that is a little bit too much oil there, but this is Mobius HP 1300. It's a medium viscosity oil, red colored. It's synthetic oil. And as you can see, I kind of cleaned up the excess that I put a little bit too much there. So we use these medium viscosity oils kind of in the train wheel, the train of wheels. You want to use these on parts that are high torque but kind of low speed. And then on the high speed, low torque parts, we're going to use a different oil called Mobius 9010. Now these oils are pretty expensive, but they last, you can order them and they'll last you almost forever because you use such a tiny amount when you're doing a watch service. But I'm talking between the greases, the oils, over $100 for, a nice little set of oils. Probably approaching $200. All right, the center wheel goes in, and then the mainspring barrel. And then we'll assemble our train of wheels. So we'll start with the escape wheel. This would be the second wheel? Maybe? Second or third wheel? So each one of these sits in a jeweled pivot on the main plate. And before I forget, let's put the center wheel bridge back over the center wheel. And you can see right in the middle of that center wheel bridge is the spot where the seconds hand pinion will go, or the center seconds pinion. This bridge is held in with 2 bridge-sized screws. Pretty much anything that's a bridge in this movement uses, a specific sized screw with a really nice, shiny, polished screw head. I say they're huge, or, large screws, but again, everything's pretty small. So here's the center seconds pinion, and that gets slid right through the center wheel, and the seconds hand actually attaches to that little pinion. This was kind of a new, I don't know, maybe not at the time, but original pocket watches and some of the original wristwatches had a seconds hand below the 2 hands on the 6 o'clock, I guess, position of the dial, and then they figured out a way to add this pinion to put the seconds hand stacked on top of the minute and the hour hand. Now we'll install the mainspring barrel bridge. A little bit of medium viscosity, HP 1300 for where the click and the click spring is going to sit. So these are, it's just a point of friction. It's a point where something is going to rotate around a pivot, metal on metal. And so we just want to help that along and prevent any metal on metal rubbing, any wear on the part, any tiny shavings coming across as this watch operates, between services, which is typically about 5 to 7 years. So this watch could possibly never be serviced again, but certainly really doesn't need to be serviced for another 5 years. These new synthetic oils that are used in watch repair these days, they don't go rancid as much as the older stuff did, or get super dry. They really just evaporate and disappear. So this mainspring barrel bridge is held in with 2 screws, and let's just go ahead and start with the train of wheels again. I think at some point I turned the movement over and these kind of fell out, or I think I may have tipped the movement holder and knocked these wheels out. So you just make sure they're in their pivots. Escape wheel, next wheel, and then this third or fourth wheel or combo wheel. I'm not sure. It's actually 2 wheels in one. Since that ratchet wheel mainspring barrel bridge combo exists, this combo wheel also interacts with both the center seconds pinion and also the wheel below it. So I guess the third wheel. So a little story behind this train wheel bridge. So this is the original train wheel bridge with the broken jewel. I ordered a new bridge, and I thought I had ordered the right part. It was a Felsa 4000 part, but it was a part number 118. So I'll continue that story in a second, but as we're putting this bridge back on, we do want to make sure that those jeweled pivots on top line up, or the jewels on top line up with the pivots of all the wheels that they sit on top of before we screw this thing down. So what you do is you move it around very gently, because you don't want to break any of these very tiny pivots off of these wheels, but you move it around until these pivots go into their respective jewel holes, and then you can see they're all spinning there, and they just stopped. As I spin the mainspring, all that power will go through the wheel train, and as long as they're all spinning freely, you know everything is lined up, and you can start to screw things down. You want to screw things down, gently at first, test the function again, and then do a final tightening of all your screws, just to make sure you're not breaking off any pivots. But anyway, back to this gear train bridge. So I ordered the wrong one. This gear train bridge actually uses part number 110. I ordered part number 118, which is apparently for a 4002 N model movement, which incorporates that self-winding mechanism into the bridge itself, as opposed to it being a separate module. I thought it looked a little funny when I was first trying to install it, and then things in my head kind of started to click. What I am going to do is buy a jeweling tool, not on this service, just for the sake of kind of getting this video done. I'm going to buy a jeweling tool. I'm going to take the jewel out of that wrong bridge that I bought, and I'm going to replace that jewel in this bridge with the one from the new bridge. It's the same size jewel. The bridge just doesn't work. And I do believe I do a side-by-side here showing exactly what I'm talking about. So just another function check. We see that all the wheels are moving freely. And then we go around and give everything a final tighten. Now that we're like 100% confident that all of those wheels are in their pivots, we tighten everything back down all the way. And there we have the train wheel bridge installed. One final function check. I like to do a lot of function checks just to make sure that everything's working. I don't want to have to take things apart. So here's that new bridge. As you can see, it has kind of an integrated self-winding bottom. So that's the self-winding mechanism, and you can see that it's kind of the newer models of this movement. They started to incorporate the bottom part of that self-winding module into the bridge itself, and it just didn't work with this movement. So let's start to reassemble the self-winding module. Let's put a little bit of HP 1300 on spots where these wheels are going to be interacting. There are two wheels that go right about here, and those two rectangular holes, I guess, pivot areas, are tiny little gears. All right, so this is the largest of the wheels inside of the self-winding mechanism. And here's two teeny tiny wheels that go in these rectangular pivots that kind of slide back and forth. I'm not entirely sure of how this thing works, but I do know how it goes back together. And then this little scorpion tail, it's kind of a ratchet. It's almost like a click. That wheel kind of protrudes from the bottom, so we put on a little piece of Rodico just to hold it all still. And that wheel interacts with those two tiny little orbit wheels. And then our little scorpion tail ratchet piece. So I do make a mistake here in this part of the video that I remedy a little later. So if you want to write down in the comments what you think my mistake is, something's missing here. Before I put this cover plate on, something in there was missing. If anybody knows, if anybody's familiar with the Felsa, 4002, this old school self-winding module, put it in the comments, or take a guess. Also, while you're commenting or guessing, just give the video a like. Really appreciate it. It'll help the channel grow as I release more of these videos. Subscribe also. I'd love it if you would subscribe. You get a notification every time I post a new video, which I'm trying to do as frequently as I can. Trying to get better at filming. I actually got some new lighting in the mail recently that will be introduced in the next video. It was a little late for this video. But the lid of this self-winding mechanism just gets installed with 3 tiny screws. See, when I did the disassembly, I should have... I wasn't really aware that this was a module that kind of could be assembled and disassembled on its own. So I didn't really take it apart like this. I took the lid off while it was still attached to the bridge, instead of just taking the module off and then disassembling the module. It all makes way more sense to me now. So here it is reinstalled back onto the bridge, and then it gets screwed onto the bridge with these 3 tiny shouldered screws. I did actually lose one of these shoulder screws, and looking back at photos, it looks like it got lost before it even went into the watch cleaning machine, because I did take some photos of the parts pre-clean and post-clean. The screw count was the same, so something happened between getting this module off, sticking it in the watch cleaning machine. I did end up finding a screw from another movement that worked, so I did get it held down securely. Off camera though. Right, so that final screw there. And then you can see that top right there, that one. That's the one that I couldn't find. I did actually replace it a little later. All right, we're getting close to having a fully reassembled watch here. Let's go back to the dial side of the movement. We'll start with the keyless works. So this blue grease is it's another Mobius grease. It's the pretty thick, high viscosity stuff. I mean, it's used on parts where you're having metal on metal contact. So really high friction areas, and the keyless works is pretty much like the highest friction part of the watch. It's the part where we're pulling the crown in and out to change, from from time setting mode to winding mode, and some even have a third position for setting the date. And that just gets a lot of wear, and you'll see these parts kind of rubbing against each other once we get more of them installed on the watch. So this grease just lubricates these parts and prevents anything from wearing, or again getting any metal shavings into the movement and really causing problems. So this is the clutch, and that wheel was the clutch wheel there. Just a little bit more blue grease where the yoke will come into contact with the clutch, and then a little bit of blue grease on the teeth where the teeth will come in contact with the minute wheel. I think the next thing we should do is probably the setting lever. Yep. So the setting lever attaches via this screw that actually screws in from the underside. So I need to kind of probably take the movement off camera for a second. Yeah, you want to put your finger on the setting lever just like this, and then it's hard. It's a hard thing to film. So, but there's a screw underneath, and then you tighten that setting lever screw down, and that's what you tighten and loosen to remove the crown as well. So here's the crown and the crown stem. We're going to use more of that blue grease because this stem, you know, if you're setting your watch a lot or winding your watch a lot, you're pulling this in and out, and it does a lot of rubbing against the clutch, the setting lever, things like that. So get my nice shaky hands and get some more of that blue grease on our crown here. And we'll go ahead and install the crown so we can do some function checks along the way here as we install more of the keyless works. They call this the keyless works because in pocket watches, you know, back in the day, you had to have a separate key that was kind of attached to the lanyard or the chain that the pocket watch came with. And you would insert that key into the back of the pocket watch or the front, kind of like an old grandfather clock. And that's how you would wind a pocket watch. There was no crown, or you know, there was a crown, but it was attached to the lanyard. Eventually, they figured out a way to wind the watch, set the watch, all with one crown, and you didn't need a key anymore, and so they called it the keyless works. All right, we'll test that setting lever, just make sure it's movable as we move that crown in and out. So this tiny little spring, we have a few of these tiny springs on this side of the movement, and you want to be really careful and not let these things fly away. It took me way longer to remove this spring than it did to install it. But this is the date corrector spring. So there's a little date corrector donut washer that we'll see a little later. That's really kind of neat. That helps click the date forward every 24 hours. So I did put a little bit of that blue grease on the setting lever because the setting lever spring that we install here in just a second is going to rub up against that post a lot. That's probably where the most tension and most friction is in the watch. It's going to be between the setting lever spring and the setting lever. All right, here we have the yoke. It's now in the clutch. And I'm going to speed this part up here because this took me quite a while to get the yoke spring. So this is another one of those springs that if you don't have this thing held down while you're trying to put it in, it is going to fly across the room. So I try to use my finger at first, and then I try to use the flat part of my little plastic pointer stick. And then I think ultimately I decide to just go with, there's a little hole there in the movement. So I hold it there, and I find a way with my tweezers to just move it over, and I think I really got lucky, I think. And so that spring interacts with the yoke, and that's what moves that, keeps that pressure on the yoke there. And now the setting lever spring, which also acts as kind of a large plate that covers the yoke spring, the yoke, and it will interact with the setting lever there on that post that we oiled. See where we put that oil, and that's where that will rub against each other as we change the positions of the crown. We'll hold it in with this good-sized screw, setting lever spring screw. Whoop. The thing about this hobby is these parts are small, and it takes practice before you can really like have control over your screwdrivers, for you're not scratching things anymore. I mean, professional watchmakers to work on like watches that cost tens of thousands of dollars and not scratch them and mar screws, it takes a lot of practice, and I'm learning. I'm still just an amateur, very, very new at this, learning every day. All right, we'll put some more HP 1300, that medium viscosity, on these posts where the motion works will sit. So the motion works is how we're going to set the watch, and also it's what moves the hands of the watch. And we have quite a bit of extra oil there. So let's make sure we clean up after ourselves with a little bit of Rodico Silly Putty. Yeah, there we go. Yep, clean up the excess around that post. How about that big one? Yeah, that one right there. Okay, yeah. Yeah, you just don't want excess oil sitting in these spots because you don't want it pooling and getting where it doesn't really need to go. Places like the hairspring, the palette, you just don't need much oil at all. We're going to put a little bit of that blue grease on the center wheel because that cannon pinion, which is, oh, no, that's the minute wheel first. So the minute wheel is going to interact with the other wheel along the movement works. The motion works. So that cannon pinion is friction fit onto the third wheel, and it actually moves at the same rate as the center wheel. The only time it doesn't is when you're setting the watch. So you need a little bit of grease on there to help move that cannon pinion while you're in the time setting mode, because you need to rotate that cannon pinion in a faster than the center wheel's moving. And the minute wheel goes on top of the cannon pinion. And then we have a little reduction wheel that goes between the minute wheel and the date wheel. So the minute wheel moves around once every hour. That's what the minute hand is attached to. And then it moves this smaller kind of reduction wheel. Oh, looks like we got those in the wrong order. We need to put the date wheel in first before we put that little reduction wheel. So we need to change the ratio between the minutes, and we need to get it to where the minutes interact with this intermediate wheel that then interact with the date wheel. And the date wheel needs to turn around every exactly 24 hours. So we go from 1 rotation per hour to 1 rotation per 24 hours. And with that, we need this small wheel in the middle, which helps us do that. Small wheel attached to a much larger wheel. All right, back to the other side of the watch. The motion works in the dial side was pretty much finished. The last thing we're going to do is put the calendar works on that side of the watch. But let's put the palette in, because this is the palette is what prevents the watch from losing all of its wind as soon as you wind it up. It's what, without a balance wheel in there, it's going to keep the wind in the watch. Right now, if we wind the watch, all of it's just going to immediately, the energy is going to go through the wheel train and get lost because there's nothing stopping it. The palette is going to interact with the escape wheel and the little banking pins, and it's going to, since there's no balance in the movement yet, the power will be held in the mainspring. So we'll put the palette in its pivots, and then the palette bridge also has a top jewel that needs to go on the top pivot of that palette fork, held in with 1 screw. And once we get this screwed in, we can just do a little function check, make sure it's moving freely and it's not, jiggling around, there's no broken pivots. Now let's put a little bit of wind into the watch. Wind, 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 wind. And now we want to test that palette, the tail of the palette fork. And as we just tap it each direction, it should kind of click over on its own. And that's the energy from the mainspring being released through the wheel train and out through the pallet fork. Now, as we put the balance back into the watch, what the balance does is that hairspring, that tiny little hairspring, that's basically your pendulum, I guess. And that is what causes that balance wheel to kind of to swing back and forth. And as it swings back and forth, that pallet fork hits this jewel on the bottom of the balance wheel, and it's what kind of keeps the whole thing moving, releasing energy from that mainspring in a very exact amount. So think of that balance wheel as you know, the pendulum of your grandfather clock. The mainspring would be the chains that you pull on your grandfather clock to have the power. The difference is we don't really have weights pulling down and keeping power moving through the timepiece. We have a coiled spring that's releasing energy by uncoiling in a very controlled way. Tighten the balance back down. That's a great feeling. Look at that watch. Look at it go. All right, we're not finished yet, though. We have some jewels on the top and bottom of the balance that we need to remove, and we need to oil separately. These gold brass springs that you see are called shock springs, and this watch does have a shock protection system. It was introduced a little later in watchmaking. You know, pocket watches did not have this. This prevents the balance pivots on the balance wheel from breaking if you drop the watch or hit it against something. If there is a shock, it's a protection against shock, dropping it, banging it. And that gold spring will absorb that shock and keep the balance pivots from breaking. And so there's a cap jewel, which is the other part there that's not attached to the Rodico. That part right there, that's the cap jewel. And then there's this jewel. And so we separate them with a little piece of Rodico. And then we need to get the jewel separated from the Rodico. Just like, come on. And this is so small. This is under the microscope, magnified by a lot. Don't worry too much about that stuff sticking, because we are going to clean these off with a cleaning solution after I get it unstuck from my tweezers. Come on. There we go. All right, now these will go into a cleaning solution, and we'll just kind of move them around, let them soak in there for just a short, not very long, not even a minute. I mean, maybe a minute. And this is going to dissolve any old oil that's on these jewels. It's on the cap jewel or in the actual jewel. So we'll take these out, and this stuff evaporates real quick. Put it on this special watchmaker paper, which is also called a Post-it note. And so I take a little wooden stick, pegwood stick that I've carved down to a point, and just, if you see any residual oil or anything, just give it a little scrub. So you don't want any old gunk on these jewels. And you want to be cleaning, and you want to put this tiny drop of oil, you want it to cover about 25 to 30% of the center. You know, you want it to try to be as exact as you can, the center of this jewel. And this is the concave side of the jewel, because the concave side kind of sandwiches with this cap jewel. So there's our cap jewel. It's actually upside down right now, so let's turn it around. And then the cap jewel just kind of sits right on top. You smush these two things together, and that little droplet of oil will kind of be suspended in that little hole right there on that side of the cap jewel. And then it's kind of capillary actioned together. We'll turn the cap jewel back around, stick it back. This is the top of that balance wheel. See that gold spring? And that pivot, as you could saw, was kind of like spinning around. Now it's like suspended in this little droplet of oil. And that's going to keep that thing really friction free. It's a jewel, it's a sapphire, it's oil. You want it as little friction as possible. And there's also one on the bottom side of the movement. So this is the bottom part of the main plate, and this is the underside of the balance wheel. You can see it rotating there in the background. You can see the escape wheel on the bottom left there interacting with the pallet. So let's remove that jewel, separate it from its cap jewel. Here we are again in our cleaning solution, making sure we don't have any old grease or oil on these jewels. And we're going to do the exact same thing. Sorry. We're going to take a piece of pointy pegwood, scrape off anything that may be there. I don't think anything was there, but just in case. And then we're going to take the smallest amount of Mobius 9010. Forgot to mention which oil this was with my shaky hands. Right there in the center of that jewel. Find our cap jewel. Cap jewel on top. I make this look easy, but I think it took about three takes. I'm not going to make you sit through 3 tries of me doing that, but yeah, nobody's perfect. But with movie magic, you can make it look perfect. We'll install that shock setting or shock spring. Whoop. You can do it. Get it. Yep. One side. And, get it. Sorry to express how small of a scale we're working on here. Again, this is under the microscope with my smallest tweezers I have. And there we go. And you can see that pivot there in the middle. All right, these are the other jewels on the main plate of the movement. We're going to oil them all with a tiny droplet of Mobius 9010. These are pretty high. Whoop. Clean that off there. Don't want that oil on the main plate. These are pretty high speed, low torque spots. And so we want the highest viscosity oil and the smallest amount of it. Just a tiny amount of oil in these. That was maybe a little too much. Maybe that too. I'm getting better. That was the right amount right there. That's what you want. And I believe these jewels, no, there are 2 jewels in the, these are in the self-winding module. Put a tiny drop of oil in those as well. All right, let's get it on the Timegrapher and see how we did. All right, well, 57 seconds a day fast. We can adjust that fairly easily. About 220 on the amplitude. It's a little low, but I do think that once we replace that jewel in the bridge, that number should increase. Also, as these wheels kind of settle into their pivots, that number should go up as well. All right, back to the dial side. Let's put the calendar on. It's a really nice looking red on that date ring. So here's a little donut. So this, I didn't remember taking this out of the watch, and it took me forever to figure out what this part went to. Here you need to put this in before the date ring. So just kind of move that out of the way a little bit. So this donut is the date jumper. I'm used to working on Seikos, and Seikos have this little like triangle looking date jumper that's attached to its own spring. It's a spring and a jumper combined. But this is a little donut jumper. And you'll see when we progress the day forward, when we test it here in a second, that it sits in between these teeth on the date ring. So, kind of set it into position right there. It's really cool. I think it's a really cool way to design a date jumper. So this is a little plate. This is where we started the whole thing, removing these plates. So we're close to being finished here. I call it the Keith Haring plate. It looks like a little Keith Haring man. I don't know. You know what I'm talking about? It's held in with this tiny little screw. So that's plate number 1 that goes over the keyless, and part of the motion works. Held in with one tiny screw. And then we have 2 other little plates that are also going to help to, it basically holds this day disc down, because there's no day disc or date wheel plate, kind of like you see on a Seiko, that helps to hold everything down. So this plate actually has that wheel between the minute wheel, that gold minute wheel, and that one that's screwed down above it. That's actually like a little sandwich of 2 wheels. And this little plate has a little, I don't know, it looks like a little shovel, and it kind of fits between the 2 wheels in that small wheel. That's also kind of a neat little part. Held in with these are the second tiniest screws. The first tiniest is in that self-winding module on that spring on the lid, but these are very tiny. I think it's quite my smallest screwdriver. It's pretty close to being my smallest screwdriver. All right, let's do a date test. Kind of fast forward here, and you can see that date wheel touches the teeth, and then the little donut helps it click over. So cool. So simple, so cool. And our final little plate here that covers the teeth of the date ring. And one final tiny screw. And I really think that just leaves us with the dial washer. A little piece of metal that just prevents the dial from squishing down on that minute wheel. And that's a good looking cream colored dial. That date window should line up with the crown. Not quite like that. Like that. And then the dial feet fit into the respective dial holes. And here, we get a better shot of the dial feet screws. So these screws screw into the dial feet, which stick out of the dial. And that's what holds the dial on. Those are the smallest screws in the movement. So never take those all the way out, because they are very hard to get back in, and they're very easy to lose. Kind of clean up our indices with a little bit of Rodico. There's not really much, this dial's in pretty good shape. I mean, anything that you see on it, you can't really do anything about it because it scratches in the enamel and in the paint. So it is what it is. Little function test on the date. Also, we want the date to flip over so that we can set the hands both at 12. Because that means the watch is at midnight. When the date flips over, when does the date flip over? The date flips over at midnight. So if we make the date flip over, we know that the watch internals are basically at midnight. And so we'll put the hour hand at 12. We'll press that into place with our, don't worry, I do get that hair up there. Yeah. All right, press that into place. I see the hair. And the minute hand, I still see the hair. All right, we'll press that minute hand on. It's a little bit past midnight, but I mean, was a little bit of time had passed between the hour hand and the minute hand, so technically maybe a minute had gone by. Who knows? Then we do a quick fast forward function check of our date. So there's noon, and we come around another 12 hours, and we should be changing around right there. Yes, a little bit early, but close enough. You should be asleep anyway. Sleep is good for you. And finally, with our nice, like these wooden tweezers are really nice. They keep me from scratching anything up the dial or the hands, or it's not good to work with because they're not very pointy. There's our seconds hand right on top of that seconds pinion, and we just give it a little push with our hand press tool. Little push. There you go. And oh yeah, just for you guys, take that, get that hair out of the way. There it is, a ticking MuDu Doublematic. So let's get this thing in the case. All right, there's our lovely gold-plated case. And the crown stem. Crown and the crown stem. We'll tighten our setting screw. And we'll make sure to put our winding rotor back on. And this winding rotor just clicks into place. Unbreakable mainspring. Not so sure about that. It was fine. It wasn't broken, so maybe. And the case back, our trusty rubber ball. Get it nice and tight. And then our straps. This is just the leather strap that came with the watch when I purchased it from eBay. I may get something different, but this one seems to work fairly well. I'm not sure this is an 18 millimeter lug width. This strap looks like it's a little bit squeezed between those lugs. It may be a 17, but I think it works. And there we have it, the MuDu Doublematic. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope to see you soon. Please do subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot. And more watches are coming down the pipeline. Thank you so much, and see you next time on the Hairspring channel.